Hi everybody, and welcome to our second module for the evidence-based practice course. This week we're going to be focusing on the PICO format and creating a clinical question. Just a little bit of background. I really liked how the chapter this week described evidence-based practice as a developmental journey. I did a lot of my research in development of thinking patterns in young clinicians versus experienced clinicians. And evidence-based practice is really intertwined with these thinking patterns. As we look at how a novice or a newer clinician steps into making clinical decisions, a lot of times what we do is we pose a clinical question and then we evaluate different hypotheses and then we deduce down to what the most likely of answers is going to be. And we use that thinking pattern in both rehabilitation and in clinical assessment and diagnosis and for various things. We also see advanced clinicians, when they're stumped up by something, revert back to using this type of hypothetical deductive reasoning. And it's a really good thing because what it does is it allows us to critically analyze our patient, the evidence that we have, and make a decision solely based on that particular case. What we tend to see in more experienced clinicians is a case-based reasoning type of thinking. And what happens in these thinking patterns is that we resort back to previous experiences. So if we've seen a case similar to what we're experiencing in that moment, we tend to jump to, okay, I've seen ankle sprains before, I know this is an ankle sprain. And you don't necessarily have to go through your differential diagnoses. Or in terms of rehabilitation, what we do is we think, okay, I've treated this pathology in the same way X amount of times throughout history and it's worked for me. This is great, and this plays into evidence-based practice because one of the three prongs is clinician expertise. But what we see is that we don't want to get stuck into that rut of doing the same thing over and over again just because that's what we've always done. So what this asking a clinical question does is it tries to make sure that we don't get into a rut of repeating the same treatments or same rehabilitation techniques over and over just because that's what we've done before. So what we do is we formulate first a clinical question. And that clinical question, one of the most common formats is the PICO format. So we look at what the patient qualities are, and then we decide on what our intervention may be. The comparison, sometimes we see it as a PIO or PO format, and it removes out that comparison part. I like the comparison because not only can you draw upon the best available research and you can look at either a control group, but you can also compare it to other cases. You can look at what's been done before. I don't think that this comparison has to happen in a specific clinically controlled trial. I think that if we apply this PICO format to our normal thinking, then really we should be drawing upon some of those expertise. And then at the end, we're looking at our outcomes. How did that work out for us, and how does that our outcomes compare to that in the literature, and will we do that again? So making sure we're constantly evaluating our practices and thinking about if we're making the decisions that are best for our patient with each new case that we see, opposed to throwing the same, softball every time at the same pathology. So making sure we're creative, not getting stuck in that rut. So this week, when we do our PICO questions, I'd like for you to make sure that you're drawing upon something that you've seen in your own clinical practice in some capacity. What we'll be doing is we'll be taking these questions, and then next week we'll be looking at searching the literature, and we're going to be digging deeper. So we're going to build off of these kind of general topics. Don't feel like you're married to them, but we will be kind of developing off of this. So this week, make sure you select a clinical case that is interesting to you and that has a lot of depth to it, is something that We can search in the literature that will likely find various types of interventions to use for that patient, and then we can really truly compare and contrast different options for that particular clinical case. If you guys have any questions, as always, feel free to shoot me an email, and I hope you all have a great week. Thanks.